Well, it's another edition of Grindhouse Purgatory, and yeah, it's cold here. It's about 15 degrees outside. I'm freezing my seeds off. That's why I'm not wearing a hat today. But now here's a film that gets, for whatever reason, very little love. And God Said to Cain, from 1970. Directed by Antonio Margheriti, a.k.a. Anthony Dawson. Now, I think the reason that this film gets so little respect was because it was churned out during the VHS days. I mean, the film was made in 1970. I really can't recall it playing anywhere, but then again, I wasn't really looking for it back then. But it seemed to surface on all these crummy, public domain VHS tapes, and then later on these spaghetti western, really bad compilation DVDs, and people really didn't seem to go for it because I honestly think it's because of the way it was presented. But Antonio Margheriti was one of the guys who really mastered Gothic horror in the Italian cinema. He did, Horror Castle, Castle of Blood, Web of the Spider, things like that. This was his first shot at doing a Western, and I really can't call it a spaghetti Western because it doesn't have any of the usual suspects like, Aldo Sambrell, Mario Brega, guys like that. It doesn't have the Morricone score. It's very dark and grim. And it also echoes a lot of the horror elements that Margheriti was famous for. Kinski also gives a very, very subdued performance, which makes it all the more creepier because we all know how manic Kinski can get. Kinski plays a guy named Gary Hamilton who was sentenced for a life sentence in a prison for robbing gold during the last days of the Civil War as he was an officer for the Confederacy. What happened was that Gary was set up by this guy, Ambar, and his canteen was left in the empty stage. Now, he had an alibi for that night that he was with this girl, Mary, but Mary got paid off and told everybody that she wasn't with him. And then she went on to marry, what's this guy's name? Akbar or something like that? Really weird name for a Western. But anyway, Gary gets paroled after serving 10 years. And he's on a stage going in with this young guy who just got out of the military. His name's Dick. He's the son of the guy who basically set him up. So Gary gets off at a way station and says, tell your father I'll see him at sundown. But he leaves his canteen on the stage. And Dick gives this canteen to his father and asks him if he knows a guy named Gary Hamilton. And his father asks why. He goes, because he's going to be here at sundown. Which basically throws the entire household there in a panic. Well, Gary goes to this old gun dealer at this outpost and tells him, I need two things, a horse and a rifle. And the guy warns that there's a tornado on its way in, a storm, which is basically a harbinger of doom. So Gary tells him, I'll be riding into town just around sundown. So now here's the horror elements. Here's somebody basically that they forgot about, thought was gone, was coming out of prison, a.k.a. back from the dead or a ghost. So Ambar, or whatever the hell his name is, tells his men, 30 men, to make sure that Gary does not get into town. So they're all waiting on the outside of town, and this impending tornado is stirring up a lot of dust and stuff like that. And you see Gary riding toward the town. Well, then there's a big blast of the wind, and the dust gets stirred up, and guys can't see anything, but they see the horse, and guess what? Gary ain't on the horse. The horse is like galloping away, like Gary was a ghost. Well, Gary wasn't a ghost. It seems that he had a friend in town, Doc Solomon, who basically left the cover of a well open so Gary could sneak down into this Indian burial ground, which is an underground cavern which runs all under the town. Well, it figures that the first guy to ferret Gary out is an Indian, and Gary blows him away. So Gary, like an avenging specter, opens fire on all these men, killing a bunch of them. Now, this guy had three main guys who were in on the whole thing. Well, one of them winds up getting shot right through the forehead, and they bring him into the church because the church bell will not stop ringing, and they want the bell to stop ringing because it's covering up any sound that Gary might make. So they drop the guy in front of the priest and tell him to silence the bell, which he does. Well, the bell starts ringing again, only this time one of the second-in-command guys is hung by the rope of the bell. Now the patriarch comes into town very pissed off and asks the priest what the hell's going on. The priest doesn't say anything, so he blows the priest away. They take the body off the bell and tell him to disable the bell. Well, his third in command is under the bell when somebody cuts the rope and the bell basically lands on him, cutting him in half in a really grim scene. So Dick rides back into town to have a talk with Gary and the woman who runs the saloon, Maria, and Doc Solomon. And Gary says, well, if you want to know the truth, they'll tell it to you. Well, Gary's dad comes into town with his men looking for him, and Dick's dad comes into town, with his men looking for Dick, and Dick sort of walks out with a shocked look on his face, and they say, we're going to take you back to the ranch. Well, Gary is now going to get into the ranch house. And Dick tells his father, I know the truth. Well, then the father takes Dick down at the basement and shows him all the stolen gold and stuff like that. And basically it was, I did it all for you, that type of shit. And he goes, well, I'm going to have to defend you no matter what. So they know that Gary's going to hit the house. Well, Gary does get in the house and confronts Mary, who feeds him a song and a dance, but he ain't buying it. And then he disappears. Well, they know he's in the house. Well, where Dad is, Dick comes running in and Dad shoots him thinking it's Gary. Then Mary comes in all horrified that, this guy shot his own son. But this guy's a mental case and he blames Mary and shoots her twice. Well, when she falls, she takes down the kerosene lamp that sets the drapes on fire, which basically has Gary and this guy stalking each other in this flaming house. Well, the other thing was that he had sent the rest of his men into town to finish off Gary, but Doc Solomon takes a couple shots at them, but is mortally wounded in the exchange of gunfire, and opens the stable doors, sending a stampede of horses out that trample all the gunmen to death. Another sort of horror element, taken from, horses in horror movies, goes back to like the opening scene of Terror Creatures from the Grave where the guy is stomped into jelly by a horse. But anyway, they're in some kind of room, Gary and the father going back and forth with these mirrors. There's flames shooting up. He's basically shooting Gary's image in the mirrors and not having any success. Then finally Gary kills him and the house is all on fire. So Gary rides back into town, tosses his gun away and says, whatever's buried under those ruins will help you rebuild the town. And then he rides out. Now, this biblical verse crawls all over the scene, when God said to Cain, yada, yada, and then the credits roll and we fade to black. This film has more horror elements mixed in with the Western than a Western would usually have. And like I said, it's not your traditional spaghetti Western, but it works on that level where, Margaretti was a master at what he did with horror films. And like I said, he incorporated some of it here. And the film isn't bad. It simply starts off a little slow and gets a bad rap because of, the shitty transfers that it's been released in. As I'm speaking right now, Arrow has released the film in a 4-film box set called Vengeance Trails, which also has Massacre Time and His Name Was Pecos, and another film, all restored on Blu-ray. So Margaretti actually did do a couple more Westerns, Blood Money with Lee Van Cleef, and in a collaboration with the Shaw Brothers, because they put in the star Lee Lowe from Five Fingers of Death, and the tagline was, the fastest gun in the West meets the most deadliest hands in the East. That was another Western he did. He also did Take a Hard Ride with, again, Van Cleef, Jim Brown, Fred Williamson, and a bunch of other American actors that were shot in the Canary Islands. Margaretti was pretty much a jack of all trades, doing all kinds of films from horror to Western to action to war. He did Cannibal Apocalypse, Codename Wild Geese, also with Kinski, Ernest Borgnine, and Lee Van Cleef. A plethora of sci-fi movies. Like I said, he give him a genre and he'd jump on it. He was one of those guys who was just happy to be working in any on any film rather. So yeah, like I said, this may be not everyone's taste, and God said to Cain, but if you're a fan of Kinski's, a fan of Margaretti's, or a fan of just weird cinema in general, you owe it to yourself to sort of check this one out. Like I said, Margaretti was a good director and could basically adapt to any genre. So, like I said, it's worth the look. No more, no less. And like I said, it's out in a really great widescreen transfer from the original camera negative on a 2K scan. So that's as technical as I fucking get here. So, all right, it's the end of January. Like I said, I'm freezing my ass off. That's why I'm dressed warm. And, we're going into next month, hopefully, and hopefully maybe this fucking pandemic will calm down a little bit. But until then, I urge you to stay safe, mask up. Thanks for tuning in, thanks for subscribing, and we'll catch you on the flip side. So this is 42nd Street Pete saying, I'm out of here.